All right, good afternoon, everyone. Clearly, I'm not Becky. Andrea is going to start it off today. But welcome to the final events in our Housing and Health Speaker Series. Wow, what incredible strides we've made over the last year, and we can't thank you enough for being part of this. My name is Andrea Karlstrom, and I'm the Director of Chaffee County Public Health. And this series was really designed to bring opportunity, equity, and knowledge to Chaffee County, highlighting policy and system changes that can address housing affordability and therefore our community's long-term health outcomes. These events have been funded by a grant from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment's Office of Health Equity, and are a partnership between your county offices of housing and public health. This event in the speaker series is a revisit to a prior event about conservation subdivision planning. And I'm so glad to see many of you have decided to join us today for this important conversation. I'd like to thank all of the people who have participated in our housing and health initiative, specifically our housing and health team. They've really just gone above and beyond to bring this all together. So thank you, Lisa Martin, Heather Gorby, and Janie Hayes. You've worked magic to bring us all together this afternoon, and we thank you for all of the hard work you give our community. This speaker series is intended not only to focus on improving housing options, but also to help address the social inequities that exist all over the place, but especially here in Chaffee County. It is part of the Colorado's Health Disparities Grant Program. And if you've not been able to join us in the past, or if you'd like to revisit some of the previous conversations, you can find recordings of a few presentations on our new website. And that website is housinghealthchaffee.org. So again, that's housinghealthchaffee.org. You can also take a deeper dive and listen to Ken Matthews and John Prey interview all of our speakers on KHEN's Chaffee Housing Report. Again, that's the Chaffee Housing Report, which you can find on their website. Now I will go ahead and turn it over to Chaffee County's amazing Director of our Office of Housing, Becky Gray. Thanks, Becky.
Oh, thank you, Andrea, and thanks for that introduction. It's a pleasure to see you tonight and to hear you have conversations about something other than our current pandemic. We appreciate all you've done to protect and educate our community during this crisis, and we're just really glad to have you on the speaker series this afternoon. So thanks for being here. I'm here to provide all of our guests that have joined us with an overview of what to expect this afternoon and to somewhat facilitate the event. Here we are back on Zoom, and this time we have a professional host helping. Jennifer Withrow with Align Virtual Solutions is operating the technical aspects of the evening, so thank you so much, Jennifer. Jennifer is also recording the event, and we will place a recording of this event on the housinghealthchaffee.org website so that you can watch it again and you can share it with your friends. So as audience members, you are all muted right now, which simply means that if you talk, we won't hear you. But we do want to hear from you, and therefore the Q&A feature on Zoom is enabled right now. So if you have questions now or during the presentation, you can ask them at any time by clicking on Q&A at the bottom of your screen, type in your message and hit enter, and the questions will come to me. After we finish watching the fantastic presentation this afternoon, I will ask the questions on your behalf. So jump on in the discussion and ask away in the Q&A feature. Another Zoom feature that we're going to be using this afternoon is real-time polling. So Jennifer, would you mind launching the first poll? There it is, fantastic. So you should all be seeing on your screen a poll, some questions that you can go ahead and answer. Your answers are anonymous, but they will help us meet our grant reporting requirements. The answers to these questions will be compiled into a report that not only will go to the state, but also will go to every jurisdiction's governing body within Chaffee County, demonstrating participation, demonstrating how much we've been able to increase our capacity of understanding these concepts that we've been talking about. And they will also include some policy recommendations based on your answers. So please jump in and participate in the poll. And Jennifer has the ability to see how complete the polling is. So I'm just going to pause for a moment, and when she tells us that the majority of you have finished answering, then we will share the results and move to the next segment of the afternoon.
And people are successfully making their way through the poll. We'll give you a few minutes to answer that.
Thank you. It was a little bit easier for us operating this grant to collect your polling questions when we were meeting in public, and we could encourage you to join us by offering delicious food. And then we could also ensure that you answer your questions by placing people at the doors and corralling you before you left. So this Zoom feature is allowing us similar opportunity to coerce and corral without the delicious food that we were able to provide in real person. Jennifer, we have a question. Is there any indication for the participants when the poll has been submitted and completed on their end?
As long as you've answered and put something in all the dots, you should be good to go.
Very good, thank you.
Just so you know that you want to make sure you scroll down, there are 6 questions to this poll, not just one. So you'll have to hit next if you're on like poll 3.
And while we are, while we're completing that poll, I can give you a little bit of explanation on why we ask the demographic questions in terms of where do you live and income ranges and what sectors you identify with. Part of the grant through the Health Disparities Grant Program has encouraged us to attract as diverse of a population as we can. And so we all know that Chaffee County is predominantly Caucasian. So our diversity tends to come in our income brackets and in our professions. And so that's why those questions are asked, is so that as we report back out to the state and to our local jurisdictions, we're able to let you know, or let them know, the diversity and the makeup of people who are participating.
So we have another question about how many people are on. So currently we have 22 attendees and of course the 4 panelists. We're getting closer to being done with voting, so give us just another minute.
And then Jennifer, when we get 90% or better complete, maybe you could share the results with us so that we can all see how familiar we might be with the idea of conservation subdivision design, as well as who participated in Randall's presentation back in April.
So I won't end the polling just yet, but I'll just give you a sneak peek at, or listen in on how many people attended back in April. And so far, we have 33%, so 6 participants who have answered yes, but we have a new group as well, 12 participants who did not.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm glad those of you who have were introduced to this have come back for more. And I'm also really pleased that there's folks who have not yet heard about this planning process that are here tonight to see how it might play out in Chaffee County. I can tell you, perhaps, while we are waiting, that we selected some parcels in Chaffee County to have these conversations around. The parcel tonight is located just outside of Salida. They were selected based on the complexity of the land use patterns surrounding them, their proximity to town and therefore water and wastewater, and their unique features, whether they be historic, whether they be environmental, or whether they be view shed. So while the parcel owners that have agreed to let us use their land for this educational exercise, they are certainly not obligated to execute these designs. The goal of this event is to gain understanding and insight about the process, and we very much appreciate the parcel owners' openness to participating in this activity. Thank you so much.
And at this point, I think I'm going to go ahead and end the polling, and we'll share our results here.
That's great.
Looks like the majority of your demographic tonight is from Buena Vista and Salida.
Salida.
Salida, thank you. And Randall, for you, it looks like as far as people familiar with the concepts, looks like 10 are moderately familiar, but we do have 3 that are not at all familiar.
Great.
Okay.
Well, then let me move on forward then and say how pleased I am to introduce to some of you again, some of you for the first time, the expert in conservation subdivision design, Mr. Randall Arndt, who is joining us from his home in Maine. Randall Zoomed with us in April and introduced the planning approach known as conservation subdivision design. And based on the feedback that we received from community members, we invited Randall back to focus in again, like I said, on some parcels in our own county. The overwhelming desire and narrative that we hear in Chaffee County to keep town looking like town and country looking like country is a difficult challenge to approach, particularly as we see our population increase and as we see subdivisions start to surround the towns themselves. How do we make room for that subdivision of land? How do we make room for landowners to realize the full potential and density of their land that they purchased? But how do we also keep the look and feel of Chaffee County that we have grown to love and that has called many of us here? And I think that the subdivision conservation design approach gives us a tool to discuss as a community that may or may not be appropriate for our needs here. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Randall Arndt, who will go into a much greater detail about what conservation subdivision design means and also demonstrate how it might look on parcels that we can all drive by later and visualize and get our heads around. So without any more pomp and circumstance, Mr. Arndt, thank you very much for joining us again this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Becky. It's a pleasure to be back. Unlike in April, we're going to be looking at areas with public water and sewer. In April, we looked at a more rural kind of situation. We might return to that later in a, next year or the next round, or we might not. But we wanted to focus on two parcels, one in Salida, or just outside of Salida, the other in Buena Vista. The one in Salida is the one we'll be looking at tonight, this afternoon, and it's a rather small parcel, so it's very different from the one in Buena Vista. The parcel in Salida is a total of 6 acres, and the developing area, grouping the development in 2 acres that would normally be spread out in 6, focuses on the view shed heading north. The idea of conservation subdivisions is one where you're designing around natural, physical, or cultural features of the property. And the point of it is twofold. One is to provide as many dwelling units as a landowner would like within the limitations of zoning. And some landowners would like to develop the maximum number that they're permitted, and others are not so much focused on that. But the main feature of conservation subdivisions is the land and how we preserve a large percentage of it forever while still providing the full number of dwelling units that zoning allows, or any number up to that the landowner would like to develop. We will have a short question and answer sort of halfway through, and a longer question and answer at the end. But I wanted to sort of frame this from the beginning in that way, and to let people know that tomorrow afternoon we'll be looking at a much larger, much more complex property in Buena Vista. And if you want to tune into that and don't want to see a lot of repetition, come in about, a 45-minute marker, 45 minutes past the beginning, and you'll be able to see what we have been dealing with as a much larger, more complex property in Buena Vista. So the next slide will basically just be a book cover of my major book, Rural by Design, Planning for Town and Country, and 2 or 3 chapters in it are particularly important to this talk. Chapter 19 on conservation subdivisions, and Chapter 20 on the use of conservation subdivisions in areas with water and sewer. The next slide shows the cover of another book which preceded that. The subtitle is Seeing More Options and Making Wiser Choices. And I like to think that's sort of the mantra for the whole talk. The next slide is a book I wrote about 20 years ago called Crossroad Hamlet Village Town, which shows how you can design traditional neighborhoods in kind of a early 20th century way, but with a lot of special features. And we'll be digging down very deeply in this presentation on how to design those special features when we're dealing with slightly higher densities with public water and sewer. The next picture is an aerial photograph of Poncha Springs, showing the traditional grid of 19th century, early 20th century development. And the only open space there is the undeveloped land, which, if this were a conservation subdivision from the beginning, it would be complete. And the open land would be a permanent park for that neighborhood, a nice waterfront park. So I think this is a good example of what a conservation subdivision might have looked like had the idea been invented 100 years ago. The next picture is from Buena Vista, and again, it shows open space in certain areas, but fairly recently developed to the west of North Sangre de Cristo Avenue on the left, and to the right of Thompson Court on the upper right-hand corner. So in a conservation subdivision, those areas might have been left as open space. So that's what we're trying to achieve in this exercise today. And I might add that in both cases, the landowners were very much engaged in the design process and have told me that they are pleased with the designs, but it's early days yet, and they might or might not go forward with a design which is very similar to it or somewhat similar to it. The next picture coming up shows what a house in a conservation subdivision could look like. In other words, it's on a narrow lot, and it doesn't have an enormous front yard. The next picture will show a similar type of neighborhood, a traditional neighborhood of the type we built 100 years ago or 150 years ago. They're very livable, very walkable, and these are the types of characteristics we're going to try to plug in to the design of the Salida property and the Buena Vista property. Next picture will show another traditional neighborhood in Salida, and how actually a park was laid out from the very beginning. North of 3rd Street is the Alpine Park, which was not an accident. It wasn't just a leftover bit of land that a developer didn't know what to do with. It was an example of very progressive, forward-thinking planning, probably 150 years ago. That's a guess in terms of time. Next picture shows Alpine Park as it is today. And again, if this were a conservation subdivision, that would be the open space that would have been carved out of the developer's parcel. And the developer would have gotten his density by making lots narrower or smaller all around the park. Next picture will show a town green where I live in Brunswick, Maine. I don't know if you do ice skating in Alpine Park, but we ice skate on our town green all winter long. The topography is such that it lends itself to that. The next picture shows a number of slides of features that are worth conserving. In this case, a feature worth conserving is a pond, it's farmland, and it's a view. The next slide shows a woodland and habitat that is worth conserving on a part of a property. My Salida property had no habitat. My Buena Vista property for tomorrow does have. Next picture shows another feature that's worth designing around and preserving. These would be natural and cultural features, such as the next slide shows, a creek or a river, the wildlife travel corridors, and again, the rural views. Next picture, I think we went backwards there, is a picture of a group of trees, because not one single tree there is worth preserving. But as a group, you could argue that in an otherwise very open landscape, that group of trees is worth preserving in a new kind of Alpine Park setting, for instance, or in a new neighborhood green, as we will see in some of the development designs that I've done for this project. Next picture shows another landscape feature, an old fence row or hedgerow between two fields. Both fields are now built on, but the hedgerow that once separated them has got semi-mature trees, and why knock them down? If a developer owns the land on both sides of the fence row, he can find a creative way of putting maybe an ingress on one side of the fence row and an egress on the other side, and have instant landscaping and something that really adds value and an amenity to the development. This is in Franklin, Tennessee. The next picture shows a similar natural feature from Tioga out near Gainesville, Florida. And this was an old farm lane with tall trees on both sides. And there were fields on both sides of those trees originally. So when the developer bought the property, he decided to keep the farm lane rather than making it a street, which would have impacted the roots of those trees. He made it a greenway for jogging and rollerblading and walking and bicycling. So this is a cultural feature that the developer recognized together with the natural features of the trees, and it is the most valuable part of this development are the house sites that are closest to this. Next picture shows another slide from Franklin, Tennessee, and this is just a ditch with a bunch of hackberry trees, which are not very special. But if you put the hackberry trees together with the running water, it is something special. And when the developer discovered that this was on his property, all he thought it was just a bunch of scrubby trees. And then some people went in to start to clear it out and clean it out, and they found, well, there's running water in there. So they actually changed the design and made the second most important entrance to this large subdivision in Franklin, Tennessee, right here, with the ingress on the right and the egress on the left. So their whole plan was changed when they discovered what an interesting feature they had in the property. But you don't even have to have trees. As the next picture shows from Wilmington, North Carolina, this was just a ditch between a couple of cotton fields, no trees at all. And the developer's landscape architect, and I think it's very important that for conservation subdivision, the landscape architect really does the conceptual site design, with the engineer doing the detailed site design. But you need to begin with creativity. So you begin with a landscape architect, and he saw that ditch, and he thought, wow, we could do something with that. And they did, and they made a really special entranceway to this development down in Wilmington, North Carolina. The next picture shows a actual cover from a subdivision regulation book that was published by the Department of Housing and Community Development in Virginia. When I saw that, I thought, well, we can do better than that. That's half-acre zoning with public water and sewer. Instead of having 20,000 square foot lots and no open space, what would it look like if we had 12,000 square foot lots, same number, and 40% open space? So you see the pond there that no one can walk to except the people that live right around it. The next picture shows how to redesign that with the same number of lots, downsized from 20,000 to 12,000, and now the park is accessible by everyone in the development. And we've actually created quite a number of very, very high-value lots in the process. So it's really pretty simple. You begin with the idea of greenlining, value-adding open space, and then putting homes around it. Not much different in concept from a golf course development. I think I may have mentioned that in April. That's the first thing the developer does when he develops a golf course development. He identifies the land for the golf course, and he hires a golf course architect. And then he hires an engineer to do the development around it. Well, a conservation subdivision is very similar. The first step is defining the open space that adds value. If it's not a golf course, it's a park, or it's a habitat, or it's a productive farm field. So there are many ways to get that extra value into a development and extra amenity and livability. The next picture will show us sort of a citywide or town-wide map of potential conservation areas, which is what the city could do and lay out conservation areas in advance of development. to say that before we develop to the north end of the town or the western side where there may be a lot of undeveloped land, let's take a look at that undeveloped land and let's look at the natural and cultural features and suggest at a macro level where we might have greenways that traverse one parcel to another so that as that land is developed one parcel at a time, it may be 3 or 4 or 5 different subdivisions, there'll be a commonality of linked open space. The next picture shows a close-up from another township showing what they were designing around. They were designing around the riparian corridor on the left-hand side and wherever there were any trees because they were drainages and they were where farmers didn't farm the land. Everything that's not a tree on this property is farmland. So they decided that they would set out conservation areas in their comprehensive plan to guide developers to those parts of the property that basically where nothing was going on. And so that the most scenic, interesting, productive for agriculture or habitat parts of the property would be preserved. And then developers would design in the white areas and stay out of the green areas. So this was a way of the municipal government providing ideas to developers so that you can have linked, connected open spaces. Next slide will show another example from the picture from 2 slides ago. And this is a detail from that township-wide map, which is in their comprehensive plan. I helped do that comprehensive plan. The next picture will show an actual development done on that part of the township, and you can see where the township's suggested open space was located. The developer carried that through into his first concept plan. The next picture shows how he fleshed out that concept plan and had a mixed-use development with some commercial, multifamily, two-family, and single-family. The open space in the northern end is going to be for sewage disposal. Because it's beyond public water and sewer, they're going to use what is called spray irrigation or drip irrigation, long used in golf course developments, but able to be used in non-golf course developments too. So this is Weatherstone in Chester County, PA, and I'm very proud of the fact that this great conservation subdivision was the first one in that township to plug in the conservation areas shown on the comprehensive plan map that guided development and conservation areas in new subdivisions. The next picture takes us to back to that original conservation map in the township's comprehensive plan. Just because it was presented 3 slides ago, I wanted to show it to you again. Moving on to the next picture, another detail of the Weatherstone development, a good conservation subdivision with central water and central sewer, and yellow units being multifamily and light cream units being detached single family. You can see there are multiple greens, and that one of the greens is a wooded area, and the other woodland areas on the property were all designed around. Every woodland area on this property, in fact, was designed around because there were sufficient non-woodland area, non-habitat area, to put all of the development that the zoning allowed. The next picture shows a photograph from that development with a multifamily 3 units joined together side by side, and they're alley loaded in the back so that in the front you don't need a street. When you put an alley in the back, you can save money up front in terms of the street cost that is passed on to house buyers, and then the maintenance is passed on to the city. So there's no street in front because there doesn't need to be. The value of the units is higher because the units front onto open space. The next picture shows another example similar to that, except there is a street in front of this. and the stormwater was handled very nicely, turning lemons into lemonade, creating park where normally you just find a rather boring engineered stormwater basin. Moving on to the next picture, we begin this process with a site analysis map shown on the hood of the car, and the site analysis map is much more detailed than you'd have for a conventional subdivision or even a cluster subdivision, because this is not a cluster subdivision, it's a conservation subdivision, which is far more advanced and progressive an idea than clustering, which is almost a 50-year-old idea that has produced very disappointing results in my professional view. So you do a very detailed inventory map of where the trees are and where the springs are and where the old farm lanes are and any wells and farmhouses and view sheds looking into the property from the road or views out from the property to the mountains. And then we have a site walk that includes, planning board, planning commission members with the developer, with the developer's engineer, with the developer's landscape architect, and I like to bring abutters in. So here we are in Sheridan, Wyoming, on a site walk for a subdivision, which we did as part of a design exercise when I went out there about 10 or 12 years ago. And it's really important because you cannot appreciate a piece of ground by looking at a two-dimensional drawing in a meeting room. Just can't do it. So site walks are really important for planning commission members to understand the property that the developer and his landscape architect and engineer bring to them. Moving on to the next slide, we see a picture of a property which is arable farmland on the southern half, well-drained, buildable farmland, and in the north, it's wet woods and a lot of floodplain. So the farmer pushed his farmland as far as it would go until it got wet, and we see strips of trees. One is the access road from the main road, the access driveway. I don't know whether you can see my cursor, going up to the original manor house. This is in New Bern, North Carolina. And then there are hedgerows which create little outdoor rooms, and there are cultural features that are worth preserving. And that's the way the property looks to begin with. Next slide shows what I think the developer is able to do. He's able to knock down every tree except in the wetlands, knock down the value-adding hedgerows, the value-adding alley of trees going up to the original manor house, and we get a yield plan based upon the maximum number of homes that could be built on all of the buildable land, not including the unbuildable wet or flood-prone land. The next picture, so that's just to give us a lot count. Next picture is what we call the primary conservation areas, and this picture are the secondary conservation areas. So the primary conservation areas were wet and flood-prone, and these are all buildable. Fields, hedgerows, historic drives, views into the property, outdoor rooms, all the things that make this property special. There's even a pecan grove in the sort of upper middle area. Next slide shows another view of this property saying, if we want to preserve half of the buildable land, in addition to all the wet woods, let's preserve the eastern side, because the western side had all those wonderful things going on, and really is a beautiful, part of the cultural landscape in New Bern. And the manor house will be undisturbed and could be sold for far more money than if the manor house was just another lot in a standard subdivision. So the potential development area is what we have left once we subtract the unbuildable areas as primary conservation areas and the buildable but very special land in the secondary conservation areas. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to fill in the potential development area And instead of putting house lots in first, which is what I did in April 6th, in a rural subdivision, in a higher density subdivision with public or central water and sewer, step 2, after determining the open space, step 2 is laying out streets and squares, with the squares being terminal vistas. Step 3 in the next slide is locating the houses along those streets, and some multifamily, as you can see, are the larger blocks, attached townhouses. The final picture in this series shows how the lot sizes vary, from being very small on the far right to gradually growing larger and larger till the middle of the property. We have estate lots that look onto the plantation house and the historic outbuildings, which is the one part of the property that sells for millions of dollars because the developer did it right. And he didn't do a yield plan. The next picture shows, I think, some bird's eye perspective sketches showing how you can do it, conservation subdivision, and preserve the finest things on this plantation kind of landscape in central North Carolina. Moving on to the next picture, I think shows the conventional subdivision, and that very valuable manor house is stuck in the middle, kind of an orphan. It's really, really sad, as well as being a really disastrous economic decision for the developer. And I can't tell you how many times developers in the South do that with plantation houses. Next picture shows, we're getting toward the end of the first half, but moving on to the next picture shows, again, the contrast. Let's move on again to the next slide, which tells you what rural conservation subdivision is not. It is not clustering. It is not PUDs. In clustering and PUDs, the open space is mostly unbuildable wetlands or floodplains or narrow strips of land that are kind of left over. Nor is it a golf course development, and I apologize for the typo. There should be an R in golf course. Next slide shows typical PUDs or clustering, and the open space there, although it might look pretty impressive, is all unbuildable land. We need to set our sights higher so that instead of jamming houses in to every part of the development that is buildable and leaving only unbuildable land, we could do better than this. This is from Teton County, Wyoming. I didn't want to show any bad examples from Colorado. I'm sure you actually don't have any. Next picture is another example of what I'm trying to avoid, and I believe this might be from Sheridan. So again, we're in, no, it's in Jackson. So again, we're in Wyoming. I see a place name in here. And this is perfectly good PUDs, perfectly good clustering, but really not anything like what we can achieve with conservation subdivision design. So you can think of conservation subdivision design as clustering or PUDs with a brain or with more hormones. The next picture is an example of, Battle Road Farm in Lincoln, Massachusetts. I've chosen it because it had public water and sewer, and it is so much different from what you just saw. And going to the next picture again, we see, not only there's a town meadow that has been created in the middle of the red roof area. There are a lot of woodlands that have been preserved, not only the wet woodlands, but a lot of dry woodlands being preserved. This was designed as a part of a design competition. The town of Lincoln bought the property and then asked developers to submit quick and dirty design concepts, and they would choose the design concept they liked best. And they got a very good one, because a lot of developers wanted to develop this highly desirable property, and the one that won was really excellent. Battle Road Farm is next to the Minuteman National Battlefield, part of the Revolutionary War battlefield areas of New England. Others are in Saratoga, New York, and others are in Concord, Massachusetts. Next picture shows some a bird's eye view of the meadow that was set aside in this property and surrounded by multifamily homes. Every building in this development is multifamily. There are three types of units, and you can't tell the difference from the outside. One is affordable, another is for seniors, and the other is market rate. And they all coexist beautifully because the architecture hides the fact that one is different from the other on the inside in terms of square footage or in terms of fits and finishes. Next picture shows some ground level photographs of these meadow homes. And that home you see on the left is the front end of a four-family building. And what you see there are three four-family buildings with the meadow end visible from this direction. Next picture is another one, a different angle from this that same meadow. Next picture shows another example of this connected architecture. Here there are 4 units, one on the left, one on the right, and 2 in the middle. And the 2 in the middle, I think one is a senior and one is an affordable. Everyone's got their own door. Everyone's got their own little porch. And when you drive by, it doesn't feel like a multifamily development. This is what you would normally see in the New England rural landscape. It's called big house, little house, back house, barn. That is a typical New England farmhouse built from 1770 to about 1830. Connected New England architecture, connecting the barn with the house. So this Boston architect got the idea of taking this vernacular historic design and creating this wonderful attached fourplex, multifamily. Next picture, I think we might be moving past that development into one in the Pacific Northwest. And this is what we call Bungalow Courts. And these are typically market rate, but some are affordable and some are for seniors. This one is just a market rate one, and everyone has alley access from the back, as in Battle Road Farm. And that's, therefore, the middle is just a meadow and a village green and sidewalks. Next picture is a ground level view, and these units are fairly small, but they're high value. And the next picture is another view of the same type of development by a different developer, again in the Pacific Northwest. And those are all, on the left, single-family homes, not attached. They are close together, but they're not attached. The building at the bottom is a small common house where they get together and have, small gatherings, and people use them socially. Next picture is same type of example, but one from North Boulder. And I don't like to use examples from Boulder, Colorado so much because Boulder is Boulder and Chaffee County is Chaffee County. But occasionally there's a really good example in Boulder. I showed this in April. And this is all affordable. And from the ground level, you can see all the alleys are in back of the units, and the middle is the neighborhood green. The next slide shows the street view, and that's what you see driving down the street in Boulder, Colorado. It looks great. The next picture shows an alley view, again from I'll get to that. This is into the middle of the green. The next picture shows another interior shot of the central green with a close-up of the homes, and they are single-family detached. We could call them detached townhouses, in fact, because they're townhouse size, but they're actually separate. And the final picture, I think, shows the alley view. So moving on, no, that'll be the next one yet. There's an alley view, close-up. And the very final picture coming up shows the alley view from the street. So this, when it was developed about 20 years ago, didn't have many trees except the ones that were planted. But given a good climate, trees will grow, and 20 years make any project on bare ground look excellent. So I think we're at let's go to Foreground Meadows. I didn't think we had that in this first slide. This first half. Foreground Meadows, as the next picture shows, can be done on the right by orientating the street on the right so that the street is parallel to the main road. That's actually Route 7 in a small town in Dutchess County, New York. So that the homes on that street on the right face across the little foreground meadow to Route 7. Route 7 is at the bottom, and this street here is the where you access these units. The way a developers typically design is to back the units up to Route 7 or any public road, which makes it really ugly when you travel down the public road, and it doesn't make it too nice for the people that live in those lots, because their backyard is essentially either a view of the public street or a view of the fence where the public street is directly behind it. Now, if you look at both pictures, you won't see that the developer has built any more street, even though he has one street here, which is single entry, single loaded. So the idea of Foreground Meadows, as illustrated in the next picture, moving on to that, is one where you have homes facing the street, but across some open space. And we actually used that design concept for Ned's property in Salida, which we'll see at the end of the presentation. Next picture is another example of a foreground. This is a close. This is a alternative to a cul-de-sac, where you come in on one side and exit on the other. So it's a one-way loop instead of a cul-de-sac. And because the one-way loop loops around some open space, it is a design feature that adds value to the cul-de-sac that a cul-de-sac would never have. The next picture shows an actual photograph of that development. It's from the 1920s, so it's 100 years old. It's in Ohio. And instead of a great big ugly circle of asphalt, there's a graceful looping street. The next picture shows another example of this from Wisconsin, actually two examples of these closes. And the radius of the turning at the end of these is the radius for a cul-de-sac circle. So the geometry is the same. It's 130-foot diameter for a cul-de-sac circle and 130-foot diameter for the curving arc at the end of these looping streets. And again, it adds so much more value. And you can use these middle areas as areas to collect stormwater and allow it to seep into the ground and plant some beautiful vegetation that enjoys having wet roots. It might be a sycamore, it might be a cottonwood, it might be a red maple that would grow very well in the middle of these green spaces, which could be the collection point for the stormwater from the street. What's our next slide, Jennifer? It's the sort of engineer's drawing of what this looks like. Let's move on to the next slide. I think we're very close to the end. Go again. Are we still on just one?
We moved on to the second slide deck. Do you want to pause for questions?
Yeah, I didn't realize it would be so seamless. That's very, sure. Very professional. I thought we'd have a gap. It's up to you whether, I could just go on to the end and finish up, or we can pause and people could ask questions about things they've seen in the last 35 or 40 minutes.
Let's go ahead and take a pause.
Yeah, let's pause and ask a couple of questions. I'll remind the audience that the Q&A feature is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I've had a couple of questions come in. One is in a couple of the examples that you offer, there was a variety of housing types. In one, I believe there was single family, multifamily, as well as you mentioned housing specifically for elderly, housing specifically for lower income. Is that typical in conservation subdivision design, or would that be in addition to the conservation subdivision design approach?
It's much more typical in areas with either central or public water and sewer, where you're going to get an overall higher density. And a, generally speaking, slightly less, lower percentage of open space because it's zoned for more units to begin with, and they don't have as much wiggle room. Out in the country, it is almost entirely single-family detached. But I've seen examples of mixed housing types even out there, but it's less common.
Excellent. Thank you. Another question that I have, I've been hearing you say that this design, or this approach to subdivision design actually increases the value of the homes that end up on it. Could you speak to that a little bit more? And maybe answer the question, why would it increase the value?
People like open space. They either like to front onto it so they can see it from their front windows or front porch, or back up to it. People like open space more than they like to see their neighbor's fence or just to see a cul-de-sac circle. It's green. There are trees. The birds are in the trees. It's a place to walk the dog. It's a place to casually meet your neighbors. It's a safe place for kids to wander into when they're beyond the toddler age. It's why developers started to do golf course developments. They figured out there's more value to a development by preserving a good chunk of it as open space, even if they had to spend $10 million to create the artificial golf course and the clubhouse. Now, the beauty of a conservation subdivision is you don't spend money on a clubhouse. You don't spend money on, a golf course architect and creating all kinds of contours and irrigation systems. And the open space that you create with a conservation subdivision basically is letting the thing alone, leaving alone the agricultural field or the woodland habitat. Sometimes it's planting trees, like in the developments where I said it was affordable housing in North Boulder. That was a bare land piece of property. So they planted trees there around the edge of the green. But in most cases, conservation subdivisions are leaving things alone. And the value, people appreciate that. Study after study by realtors, by developers, the Home Builders Association, the Urban Land Institute, the Realtors, National Association of Realtors, they all agree. Open space is a benefit to the developer because it's a benefit to the owner. And that's why my developer friend Bob Engstrom in the Twin Cities area calls this twice green. Green financially, green environmentally. That's his phrase. And he was a principal elected officer of the Urban Land Institute in Washington, D.C. for decades, a very well-respected developer from the St. Paul area.
So thank you for saying that phrase, twice green, green environmentally and green financially. You mentioned the golf course subdivision design and the amount of money that developers are willing to put into the golf course. We've also seen in our community where the conservation easements were negotiated after the subdivision and then purchased. And that also costs some money. And so can you explain to me where there might be hidden costs in this approach? And typically where are those, who bears those costs?
Okay. Well, in a conservation subdivision, you look at the total of the property and you figure out how many house lots either the zoning allows or how many house lots the developer wants to build up to that limit. And then we carve out the open space as step one, as if it were a golf course. And at the end of the process, the open space that was carved out adds value to everybody else, but no one has to buy it because it's part of the original property. So if the subdivision contains, just take a hypothetical example of 20 acres, and say 10 acres is carved out for development, the developer still gets on the remaining 10 the same number of houses he'd have on all 20. So the open space comes to the end of the process with no costs. It is free. So you don't have to buy land back from the developer. The developer sets it aside in the design process, and he doesn't lose value because he's not building on those 10 acres, because he builds twice as many units on the other 10, and he comes out whole. In fact, he comes out ahead because he builds less road, and if there's public water and sewer, there's less water line, less sewer line, less utilities like telephone or internet. So everything is less in terms of cost. And he doesn't even have to mess around much with the land because if you're going to develop the land for houses, you've got to, rough out the bumps in the topography. But if it's conservation subdivision, if it's got some slope to it, all the better.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you to the audience members who are typing questions into the Q&A. I'm kind of separating in my brain these questions into more technical questions that are associated with code, etc. And I'm going to save those for later. But there is another question about how might we ensure connectivity between developments as they occur? And I'm thinking back to a community that you showed a slide on where they had, prior to any development, designated conservation areas. Can you talk to me about how, or can you talk to us about how that initial approach in the comprehensive plan of designating the conservation leads then to connectivity between the green spaces and what could potentially be trail systems, etc.?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. In the comprehensive plan, it's important to have a chapter on open space, and in that chapter, to have a conceptual sketch showing where the logical greenway connections would be. For instance, in Bozeman, Montana, there's a drainage that runs north-south, and in my April presentation and in the book, Rural by Design, you will see the case example I showed in April in Bozeman. And I forget the name of it now, but I'll remember it before the end. The developer, instead of just backing homes up to the drainage and making the backyards go down to the drainage, he said, let's put a street on each side of the drainage and have homes on the east side of the eastern street and the west side of the western street, so that all the land between the two streets, where the creek was, could be the linear park. And he added so much value to the homes on each of those streets. Now, in a case like that, you want to maximize the number of homes that you're adding value to. So instead of doing 100-foot lots or 80-foot lots, you want to do 60 or 40. Maybe do some two-family homes. Maybe do some attached homes or detached townhouses to get your density along there, so people are looking into that wonderful park that runs right through. And the next subdivision, as you go leave that property to the next property along that same drainage, the comprehensive plan would say, we want that to be a continuation of this open space. We just don't want you to run your back lot lines down to it. So we can really promote progressive design principles, which come to the benefit not only of the whole community, but to the people that live in that development and to the developer that is developing it.
Very good, thank you. We still have some questions coming in, but why don't we move forward with your presentation now, Randall, and save these questions for the end.
Okay. Well, green streets are a way of replacing asphalt with grass. Next picture shows a street with homes fronting onto it, and they all have alley access with rear access garages. And instead of having a street in front, they have a 50-foot right-of-way with trees planted. So you can do this every second cross street in a grid if you wanted to have it that frequently. The next slide will show an aerial photograph, I think, showing an alley on the left and an alley on the right and the green street in the middle. So you have to have cross streets. You can't, they can't all be green. But if you have 20 cross streets, you could have 10 of them that are green like that and 10 of them that are asphalt. And so that's going left to right. You could go left and have alternating green asphalt streets. And to the right, you could alternate green asphalt. Okay, so we've gone left to right. What about north to south? Well, instead of having the green street just be one block long, it could be extended to the north, block after block. It'd be extended to the south, block after block. And we could have safe routes to school. We could have a wonderful place to walk the dog, block after block after block, going through green streets. And do the developers love it? Boy, do they love it, because not only does it add value, but they don't have to do any asphalt or curbs. They just do some sidewalks. That's it. So the next picture is probably another green street view, a tighter one from Dwani Plater Zyberg development in Maryland. That may be the end of my green street pictures. I don't know. Let's go on to the next picture. No, there's another one. This is from the center of the continent. It's at Aurora, Illinois. And the developer of this calls these kid streets. Now, unlike the other one, which I liked a little bit better, with two sidewalks and a green between the two sidewalks, this has got front lawns going down to a central sidewalk. So this is sort of the poor man's version of the other one, but it's still so much nicer than an asphalt street. And he designed these specifically for kids. But as I say, if I had my druthers, I'd ought to do it all of them the way the first example was. Going back, yeah, go back another one. If you go back two, Jennifer, you'll see that. Yeah. With a strip of concrete on each side and a nice broad green down the middle. To me, that's really the epitome, the way to go. But if you're on a real budget, you can do the kid street, which is so much better than just an asphalt strip. Okay, let's move on to the next picture. And these are attached greens. So it's like a green street in that you come off your front porch onto the green. But it doesn't, they're not looking at another row of homes. They're looking at a quarter-acre or half-acre neighborhood green. The next picture shows another example of an attached green. This is from Beaufort, South Carolina. And they're alley loaded, and the fronts of the homes front this waterfront park. So here you got the highest value real estate on the property, waterfront. And everyone's got a waterfront view. But no one owns down to the water. That's the dumb way of getting money out of a property, by dividing the land down to the water. So great, you get 15 lots that are waterfront. I'm proud of you. But a smarter developers say, let's put a waterfront park there. Let's have these high-value homes face the river across this lovely park, and all the other 50, 60 homes in there get the value of A, the waterfront park, and B, the moorings on the river on a common dock. So instead of having 15 private moorings, now we have a common dock so that people in the interior of this development have a reason to pay more. So here's a very savvy developer that just didn't subdivide down to the river. This is just a standard townhouse in that Pennsylvania development I showed earlier called Weatherstone, and it fronts onto a small park. I'm standing on the sidewalk. Behind me is the street. So this has no street frontage. It's got park frontage. And behind me, on the back end of the park, behind me is the street. Another example of creative design, moving on to the next slide, will be a development from the Detroit area where the homes on the north and the west front directly onto the park. The homes on the right-hand side face the park across the street. So everyone's got an alley. You can see the alleys in the back of every single house. And these homes are detached townhouses on lots that are 40, 50, and 60 feet wide. The next picture shows, this example, the one you saw one moment ago from the sky. So the last picture was a drawing, and this is the way it ended up, just the way the drawing shows. So now the next slide will show us pictures from the ground, showing the homes fronting directly onto the green. Another picture shows the same thing. So you can walk off your porch onto the green. In fact, it's a little bowling green. It's what the developer wanted to do to make it special. They preserve trees right at the edge of the sidewalk, at the edge of the green. Next picture shows another example of how garage doors should not be orientated on narrow lots. On narrow lots, garages take up the entire frontage. So could it be more unattractive? I'm not sure. Next picture shows another example of front doors facing the street, front garage doors. You don't see any people doors in these pictures because the garage doors take up all the frontage on narrow lots. This might as well be an alley view, but sadly this is not an alley view. This is the street view. The next picture shows another alternative. Going back to the 1860s in this Maryland community, these homes are on 32-foot lots, so that within 100 feet you get 3 detached townhouses. Not a single garage messes up the street view. The garages are accessed from the alley where they should be on a narrow lot. So this type of design informs new urban design, which is what I have been using in Ned's property and in Jed's property tomorrow. Next picture shows detached townhouses of a newer vintage. The last ones dated from the 1860s. These date from about 10 years ago in Davidson, North Carolina. These are affordable homes, detached, on 17 feet wide, and they're on house lots that are about 23, 24 feet wide. Again, alley loaded, and they're affordables, and you might think you're going to just look into your neighbor's window from one side wall to another, but they're clever, and they offset the windows either vertically or horizontally, so you don't see into your neighbor's house at all. Next picture shows some more narrow lot development, but not affordable, quite, upper middle class, beautiful design, and not messed up by a garage door because they use alleys. So that's why I'm using in Ned's and Jed's designs or alleys throughout. Next picture shows more detached townhouses of a sort of a Charleston style with a double-decker porch. Going forward to the next picture is another one this was from North Carolina, and it's got a very small porch in the corner and very close to the sidewalk. So there's virtually no front yard. therefore, the backyard between the house and the garage can be a private area for a swimming pool, for a fire pit, for a patio grill. By bringing the house forward on a quiet residential street, we can have more room in the back between the house and the garage. So the next picture shows a detached garage, which is sort of unusual, but it's not. If you can't do an alley for one reason or another, you can do these garages that are front-facing, but they're in the back. They're visually subordinated. So you can do detached townhouses with detached garages that are street-loaded, if you will. Next picture shows another example of that, but not designed well because the street facing garage door is part of the facade. So instead of the facade of the house being all windows and people doors, a good chunk of the facade is a garage door. So I would recommend the other. Two family homes without back lanes are pretty hideous. Let's go see that. That's from Wyoming. If you have a two-family home, you really, really must have a back lane. The next picture shows another example, which is not so nice, maybe a little bit better, but the garage doors are pretty dominant. Next picture shows the proper way to do this with a back lane going forward from the 1930s in Philadelphia suburbs, and updating that to the about 10 years ago. Next picture shows a perfect example of a two-family house, common wall down the middle, and no garage door in sight because they're where they are where they ought to be in the back. Next picture shows another good example, and this is from Eagle, Colorado, and it doesn't look like a two-family house like the last one did. So in other words, this one is actually more cleverly designed. It looks like a single-family house, but really there's one on the left and there's one on the right, and each got its own porch and each has got its own front door. Next, another picture from Eagle, Colorado, showing two front doors, and another Eagle, Colorado example with the two front doors being more cleverly hidden, like the first example I showed 2 slides back. You'd never pass that on the street thinking, oh, there's a duplex. Again, the garages are totally in the back where they ought to be. Next picture, moving forward, shows another example from Eagle, and let's move forward again to, I think, multifamily. Without back lanes, you got your front door goes onto a parking lot. Not so nice. You can do that same sort of thing, as the next slide shows, front-facing, multifamily, with garages instead of a parking lot. But better than that, I think this is better than the last one, but better than that is the next picture, which is back lanes. So you completely get the garage doors out of your facades and then have a beautiful, elegant-looking townhouse like this one from Davidson, North Carolina, or this one from the Pacific Northwest, Seattle area. Again, all the garages are in the back. The next picture shows another multifamily with the garage doors in the back. And the next picture shows another one from Eagle, Colorado, 3-family. Another one coming up from Eagle, Colorado, and a third one coming up from Eagle, Colorado. And the next picture is the aerial, which shows you where the garages are. So McDonald Street is the street that you were seeing, and the cement strips are the sidewalks, and the alleys are in the back. So you see the garages at the very top of the picture. There are 6 in the bottom, where my cursor is running. There are 6 garages in the bottom, and the alley is down in here. So here's a way to do the multifamily so that there is no garage intrusion into the streetscape. I think we're getting very, very close to the end, which means Q&A is coming up soon. Mid-block walkways are an old idea. This is a 100-year-old design from Housing the Shipbuilders project. during World War I, where you have little pathways between house lots. On a long block, it's a way for pedestrians to get through from one block to another. That's from Seaside, Florida, and the next picture is from Radburn, New Jersey, and that dates from 1929 or 1930. Moving forward to the next picture, Terminal Vistas. As you come down with my cursor down from the top, what you see is the green, because it's the end of the straight street. And then as you come along the curving street, way over here, Jennifer, down here, this is your Terminal Vista coming down to the green, and coming along here, the curving street, what you see are the views along the outside edge of the curve. You don't see the views on the inside edge of the curve where your eye is going as you travel through. So here is a Terminal Vista from a diagonal street coming into a green in Harbortown, Tennessee. And in the next picture is a ground level view of exactly the same area with a diagonal street coming in, terminating in the village or neighborhood green. A little design technique that's really important when you're dealing with a higher density and many more lots per acre. Next picture, moving forward, is how to design around the largest trees. This is from the town of Tioga near Gainesville, which I showed you a snippet of earlier. Next picture is another slide from Tioga, and the greenway that runs horizontally through the middle is the old farm road, and that's the picture you saw from about 45 minutes ago. That's the old farm road, which is now the greenway running right through the middle of the village of the town of Tioga, which is multifamily, single family, mixed use, very walkable new urban community. Next picture, moving on, is our Salida case example. This is the entire property. The Arkansas River is to the right. Route 105 is Old Stage Road, and the farmhouse and barns are in the lower right-hand corner. The development area will be the top third, the 2 acres on the top, which I'm outlining with my cursor down in here. So this is the property. Not much to design around on the property, but really nice views looking north. So that's what we're going to be focused on. Next slide shows a number of pictures taken from the street. This is from Old Stage Road on the left. The next picture is another shot from Old Stage Road, and you see one of the barns and Ned's house on the left. Next slide shows another Google picture from Old Stage Road, a little bit closer up. And you see a couple of boxcars and a close-up of one of the barns. And moving forward to the next slide, we will see, go back to that one, yeah, that's what is going to be built next to Ned's property. So Ned's property is on the right-hand side on this property line going to the east. And so we're going to have a road going down the side, and that road is going to come in here to the left, but there will also be a little alley because these houses that are facing the street will have an alley behind them so they can be narrow lots, get a lot more than. So we're going to go to the next slide, which is Ned's property aerial photograph again, and the next slide is the design we came up with. Oh no, sorry, the views. The views looking due north are what we want to focus on, so that when we design a curving line of houses around a neighborhood green, this is what all the homes are going to look at. Next picture shows another view of what you see from that property, and the next picture is another view taken by Ned a few days ago, showing the same kind of view that we are very sensitive to. So I believe the next picture is maybe the final one. It's the design we came up with. So Old Stage Road is on the right. Ned's farmhouse is in the lower right-hand corner. The top part of the property shows about 10 house lots facing forward. across a village green with a nice curving crescent-shaped design. And they are all alley loaded, so they can be very narrow. They can be even townhouses. And then the alley splits in a Y shape, as you see here where Jennifer's cursor is. And in that Y-shaped alley, one of which is an ingress, which is where the cursor is now, and the other which is an egress on the other side, there'll be homes facing that green, not facing it, sorry, homes with the access to that green, and the garages will be on that northern end, where the arrows are. The garages are going to be in this northern end here of these 4 house lots, and these house lots will face south toward either just part of Ned's property, or it might become potentially maybe a half-acre community garden. There are a lot of different things that could be used for. But the open space idea is to separate Ned's property with a line of trees and an alley, and then people's garages in the back, alley-loaded garages, and people facing forward to the north to get these wonderful views, and then here facing south, because there are other views in that direction too, but they're not quite as stupendous. So that's what we came up for Ned's property, and these are my contact addresses and emails, and I check my email every day. Lots, every hour usually, unless I'm out and about. So we have some time for questions and answers. So let's fire away.
Well, thank you very much, Randall. I appreciate all of the examples that you shared. They're quite beautiful. I have one comment that came in from a participant, and it says, this is just a comment. Green streets remind me of walk streets at the beach. I lived on one. It was wonderful. You meet your neighbors and live on a quiet street. So I think that's a nice comment there as well. Another question that came in, it says, as a devil's advocate, with all the green open space, how does that track with the community's desire to limit its park maintenance budget? If we have more green spaces.
It's a very good question. In most cases, these are not municipal parks. These are it's part of a development, so it's development open space for the use of those people. Now, having said that, Radburn, which is about 100 years old now in northern New Jersey, people walk through Radburn as if they're walking to the beach. They're walking to the train station. They're walking through the green space in Radburn, as they will do in that development up in Bozeman, Montana, I mentioned earlier, whose name still eludes me, but it's in the book. So you have the book, go to chapter 21, chapter 20, and you'll see Bozeman, Montana. And this open space can be part of a municipal park if you want it. So if Bozeman wanted to have this as part of a municipal greenway, they could say to the developer, we'd like to have that as a municipal park. Will you donate it to us? And he might say, sure, get rid of it. Or no, we want to keep it sort of private. It's up to him. And if he says, no, we want to keep it sort of private, and the city says, well, we'd like to have it more public, the developer might say, well, everything's got a value. How much is it worth to you? I'm not going to charge you $5 million, but what is it worth to you? So it might be free to the city. It might not be free to the city, but it probably would be. And in terms of your budget, you would either decide you wanted it or decide you didn't. But these are, generally speaking, not municipal open spaces.
And so does that mean those open spaces are maintained by homeowners associations?
Yes, the home associations are set up so that as you sign your deed at the closing, you sign a home association agreement. You're a member. You got to pay the dues. But the dues aren't great because you don't have a swimming pool there. typically. You don't have a golf course clubhouse. You've got some grass, you got some trees, you got some woodland trails, you got some animal habitat. You may have some trails along a creek. So it's not a big expense.
Very good. Jennifer, we have had a request to share that last slide again with Randall's contact information. Could we put that back up while we continue the Q&A conversation?
Sure. And the
Sure.
answer has already been sent as well. So if you open the Q&A, you can see it there, but I'll be gladly to share that information.
Fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's see, a couple of other questions. One about affordability. So I would be remiss to ask. We already discussed that the conservation subdivision designs tend to create desirable environments, and therefore the desirable environment is lucrative for a developer. It seems that perhaps some of the affordability comes in because there is the ability to increase density to some extent. And so we can put multifamily, duplexes, triplexes, or quadplexes in there. But is there other approaches to ensuring that this design approach results in some affordable housing in the mix?
Yes, absolutely. In Lincoln, Massachusetts, they made it a requirement that 1/3 had to be senior, could be market rate, but senior. 1/3 had to be affordable, and 1/3 could be market rate. And they gave the developer a density bonus. They bought the land. They could do what they wanted, and then they zoned it accordingly because it was the town. There's a lot of public meetings. They didn't just do it arbitrarily, but a lot of public meetings. And Lincoln wanted to get public housing because if they didn't, the state of Massachusetts would have hammered on them. And the state of Massachusetts got a very strong law that if you don't take your fair share of affordable housing, we give the developers the ability to ignore your zoning and do as they please. It's a zoning override. So Massachusetts is pretty serious about affordable housing. The example from Boulder called Poplar Gardens, again, it's in the book. That was an initiative of a housing authority in Boulder. So if you have a housing authority in Salida, you could do the same thing. You could copy the plan. These pocket neighborhoods you could almost Xerox the plan. They're so replicable. You just modify it a little bit for the shape of the parcel. One might be skinnier and one might be fatter, and one might have a little bit of a crook to it. So you just bend the units around. Very, very easy to do. You could, of course, incentivize developers in a number of ways. One is the density bonus. Another is saying, well, we'll offer you the idea of green streets. So that's a big, you don't have to pave the street.
Savings.
Or we'll allow you to have really, really, really narrow lots. So you get more units along the street.
Okay.
And some of those narrow lots could be market rate. Like in those pocket neighborhoods, many of them are market rate and very expensive. The one in Boulder was not market rate because it was Boulder Housing Authority. But a lot of those pocket neighborhoods are very expensive, even though the lots are like a thin slice of salami.
Very good.
People like it because of the green. It's social, and they're typically limited to about 12 to 15 houses. That's the secret of keeping it small enough so that people will know their neighbors.
Very good.
And you can do that on 1.2 acres, so you don't need a lot of land.
That's great. So, and you kind of showed us that with Ned's parcel, the sketch that you shared there. One question came in, and I've had this conversation a lot since April, that many of your examples show more of a humid, moist climate where there's trees and there are features on the parcels that lend themselves to kind of shielding homes and creating that sense of, I think you called them outdoor rooms. In Chaffee County, and this is a little bit different than our conversation about these closer to town lots, but in unincorporated Chaffee, we are very arid and high desert, and many of our properties don't have a whole lot of vegetation, if any. And so Ned's is slightly an example of that. And I'm wondering if you could speak about how we could incorporate conservation subdivision designs in a very flat, treeless area.
Well, going back to the recording of my April 6th and the book, in the book is a co-housing called Heartwood, which is in La Plata County, Colorado, outside of Durango. Quite flat, quite treeless, but people plant native vegetation, which grows well. So you plant the trees that don't have a huge water requirement. And then you harvest the water to make sure that the water that does fall comes off the roofs, goes into rain gardens. And the water that comes off driveways and sidewalks and any street pavement goes into areas that you want to vegetate. Like I said, in the idea of the close, which is your looping cul-de-sac street with the green space in the middle. If the streets are tilted so that they tilt inward to the middle, all the water will run into the middle. It's a one-way loop, so it doesn't have to be a double crown street. So it's this is the way the Indianapolis Speedway is actually built. You go around a corner, they super elevate it. That's the engineering term. And so you would have the high end of the street on the house side and the low end of the street, maybe 4 inches lower, on the green side of the street. And that middle area that's where all your stormwater goes. So you can grade the site so the stormwater goes where you want it. And then you plant trees. If you don't like a lot of cottonwood fluff, you wouldn't plant the cottonwood. But if you like the cottonwood fluff, because it is so traditional, you plant them there or something else that grows well in your climate. So native landscaping, and there's something called xeriscaping. People know about that in your area. That means picking plants that have been there for thousands of years instead of something that comes off a truck from a nursery in Michigan.
So if I can maybe summarize an answer to that question, Ned's lot did not have a lot of vegetation or topography on it. But the asset that you did orient the design around was the view shed. And then what I'm hearing is after you orient around an asset such as a view shed, then you come back in with appropriate native, drought tolerant vegetation for your landscaping. And you consider the engineering design to make sure that you are causing your rainwater to drain in a manner that helps those plants succeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And what I'll do between now and tomorrow is add a few slides of developments that are in very dry areas and show the landscaping there. Just there's one I remember where they had a divided road. And down the middle, they planted Palo Verde and because there's some cactus in there, saguaro cactus. So they designed the road around the cactus, and they planted more Palo Verde in between, green stick.
So we have one more question, and I've saved it for last because I think it's really at the crux of the end of this conversation. Should Chaffee County appreciate this approach? And should Chaffee County want to move forward in encouraging or even mandating subdivision conservation design? How can communities build it into the code and the land use policies? And a similar question alongside of it, and maybe a different way of asking it, is how do we get builders and developers to buy into this idea?
Well, I don't like the idea of mandating much unless it's a public health safety issue. But we could structure the zoning to have a density disincentive to say, this is the way we want to go. And we're happy with the densities we have now, and we want to save any density incentives for affordable housing. We can't give a density incentive for affordable housing, another density incentive to have developers do the smart thing financially for them and for the community. So we'll apply a density disincentive. If you don't want to do conservation design and just want to have house lots and streets, instead of having 20 units, you'll have 10 or 12. That's legal because you still have the ability to do the full 20 with a conservation design. Another way of doing it is to write into the zoning and subdivision regulations the requirement the developer come in with 2 quick and dirty concept plans. One is the yield plan showing the number of units with a straight conventional development, no open space, just house lots and streets, and then take the same number of units and do it with a conservation design. And then the staff gets to evaluate this professionally, and the ordinance would say staff is directed to evaluate the 2 alternative plans and report to the Planning Commission which best meets the policy goals of the comprehensive plan, and maybe even the purposes of the zoning district, which could be expanded to include not only provide housing, but to conserve habitat, wildlife travel corridors, scenic views, things like that. Within the spirit of allowing full density. So then the developer has to make a clear and compelling case at a public hearing why paving over the entire parcel with house lots and streets better meets the official policy goals in the comprehensive plan than a conservation subdivision. So those are 2 ways to amend zoning and subdivision regulations to point to the direction. And you say, well, that's pretty radical, Randall. Well, what I think is radical is having a comprehensive plan in the first place, maybe for the last 15, 20, 30, 40 years in Chaffee County, that talks about preserving open space, rural character, scenic view sheds, wildlife habitat, travel corridors, and in the same breath have a zoning ordinance that says, but it's fine to go out and create half-acre lots in the half-acre zone, 2-acre lots in the 2-acre zone, quarter-acre lots in the quarter-acre zone, with no requirement for open space. That's radical. What every county in the country is doing now is radical. It's taking their comprehensive plan and saying, we spent years doing it, tens of thousands of dollars, how many hours of meetings, and then we're saying, ignore it. Just business as usual, standard subdivision. So I'm saying what I'm suggesting is not radical, it's just implement the comprehensive plan. And here's a way to do it.
Thank you, Randall.
Now there's another way to implement the comprehensive plan, and that is to take out all those policies and say our goal for Chaffee County in the future is to look an awful lot like, pick the place that you don't want to look like. And I won't name that because I don't know. I've heard that people say you don't want to become another Boulder. So, you might say, well, you don't want to become another like this. The quickest way to becoming to what you don't want to become is to ignore the comprehensive plan policies and goals and have zoning that allows development to go forward that doesn't fulfill those goals. And this is a way that gives developers all the density and reduces their development costs and gives them added value. So I can't wait to come out to Chaffee County and buy a lot of land and develop it that way.
I'll keep my eyes open for you, Randall. Thank you. I appreciate your thoughts. We are rounding the corner on the end of our time here, and I'm thinking that this might be a good time, Jennifer, to put up our post-event poll. And while our attendees are answering that poll, I wanted to thank you very much, Randall, for joining us again. I look forward to the conversation again tomorrow. I will tell you that you are creating waves while you were speaking. I was receiving both text messages and emails from people weighing in on the conversation privately, and appreciating the words that you're saying, and appreciating the fact that we have multiple approaches to how we are going to choose to manage our growth here in Chaffee County. And that this is...
I encourage people to look at the website, greenerprospectsplural.com, and there's a whole pile of free articles. If you go under products, products is one of the buttons. You can browse the books. I'm willing to sell you books too, but it's not an advertisement. There's a bunch of free stuff there that you can download and then email and share.
Yes, you have shared ample with me, and I appreciate it. And I will tell our audience that I have copies of this book. This is Randall's latest book. Every planning department in Chaffee County has received a copy. Sorry, Salida, I haven't got yours downstairs yet, but it's in my office. And I do have one available for loan. It's currently checked out, but it will come back to my office, I am certain, and I will be able to share it with others as well. So please know.
And if anyone wants their own copy, please don't buy it from Amazon. Are we still there? Or I'm off? Okay, because Amazon will charge you more than you can if you buy it through my website. Oh, there you go, products. You click on that products button, and free downloadable publications is at the bottom, but Rural by Design is at the top. So if you want to buy it, you know, that's how you do it. But if you want the free stuff, under book description it tells you the price and all. But I wanted to have everyone see the free stuff. There they are.
Jennifer, do we look like we have good participation in our polls? Or...
I think we do. I'm going to end the polling now, and we'll share the results.
That's fantastic. So I think it's interesting to notice that participants in this call primarily believe that this type of local policy and system should be encouraged in Chaffee County. So that is good information for our grants, good information for our planning community. People feel very familiar with this now, so that's good news too. It says that we have increased our community's capacity of understanding these complex issues. I have one last comment coming from our audience. It says, this was excellent and inspiring. So thank you for that lovely comment. I appreciate hearing that kind of feedback. And Randall, thank you again. Jennifer, we appreciate your technical support. You're so much better at this than I am. And I look forward to the conversation tomorrow. Please feel free to invite your friends. For those of you on the line, we can host many more people on this Zoom. And I'd love to continue the conversation and further the conversation in Chaffee County.
Okie doke. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
See you tomorrow.
You too.
Bye, Jennifer.
Bye-bye.
Bye.